In the summer of 1883, an island between Java and Sumatra committed an act of geological violence so profound that it literally erased itself from existence. The eruption of Krakatoa wasn't just a natural disaster. It was nature's declaration that humanity, with all its Victorian-era confidence and industrial might, remained utterly insignificant before the raw power of the earth. This wasn't a tragedy that could be prevented, managed, or even properly understood by the people who witnessed it. It was pure, primal annihilation. Krakatoa had been rumbling for months before the final cataclysm, sending up steam and ash like a pressure cooker slowly building toward explosion. Local residents on the nearby coasts noticed the disturbances, but largely went about their business. Why wouldn't they? The volcano had been dormant for 2 centuries. The Dutch colonial administrators, busy extracting wealth from the Indonesian archipelago, paid little attention to the geological warnings. This was the age of empire, after all, when Europeans believed they had conquered nature itself through science and industry. The idea that a mountain could simply unmake itself seemed absurd. That arrogance would cost tens of thousands of lives. On August 26th, the volcano began its true awakening. Explosions shook the island throughout the day, growing progressively more violent. Ships passing through the Sunda Strait reported pumice stones falling from the sky, some pieces large enough to damage vessels. The sea itself began to behave strangely, rising and falling in irregular patterns as the volcano's convulsions disturbed the ocean floor. By nightfall, the eruptions had become continuous, a roaring cacophony of destruction that could be heard hundreds of miles away. But this was merely the overture. The main performance would begin the next morning. At approximately 10 o'clock on August 27th, Krakatoa detonated with a force that ranks among the most powerful events in recorded human history. The explosion released energy equivalent to roughly 200 megatons of TNT, about 13,000 times the power of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The sound it produced became the loudest noise ever documented, heard clearly nearly 3,000 miles away in Perth, Australia, and Rodriguez Island near Mauritius. People 4,800 kilometers distant heard what they described as distant cannon fire. The pressure wave from the blast circled the Earth 7 times, recorded on barographs in cities across every continent. The explosion was so violent that it ruptured the eardrums of sailors 40 miles away. But here's what makes this disaster particularly terrifying. The explosion itself killed relatively few people directly. The real killer was water. When Krakatoa exploded, it didn't just eject rock and ash into the atmosphere. It obliterated huge portions of the island itself, creating a massive underwater void. The ocean rushed in to fill this cavity, then rebounded with apocalyptic fury. The resulting tsunami generated waves over 120 feet high in some locations, walls of water that traveled at speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour across the open ocean. These waves struck the coasts of Java and Sumatra with no warning, no time for evacuation, no chance of survival for the coastal villages in their path. Entire communities were simply erased. The town of Merak on Java's coast was home to thousands of people on the morning of August 27th. By afternoon, it no longer existed. Not damaged, gone. The waves stripped the land down to bedrock, carrying away every building, every person, every trace of human habitation. The official death toll from the disaster was listed as 36,417 people, but this number is almost certainly a dramatic undercount. Many remote fishing villages and coastal settlements were obliterated so completely that no one remained to report their existence, let alone their destruction. The true number of dead likely exceeded 40,000, possibly much higher. The tsunami wasn't confined to Indonesia. It radiated outward across the Indian Ocean, killing people in Sri Lanka and India. Ships as far away as South Africa recorded unusual wave activity. The SS Berbice, sailing near the epicenter, was lifted by a wave and deposited nearly 2 miles inland, where it sat like a monument to the ocean's power. Her crew survived, stranded on what had been dry land that morning, surrounded by a landscape that no longer resembled anything they recognized. The wave also carried a Dutch warship, the Beru, over a mile inland and deposited it 30 feet above sea level, killing all aboard. What followed the initial explosions and tsunamis was perhaps even more unsettling. Darkness. The ash cloud from Krakatoa blocked out the sun across the region, plunging areas within a 50-mile radius into total darkness for over 2 days. This wasn't twilight or heavy overcast. This was absolute blackness at noon. Darkness so complete that people couldn't see their hands in front of their faces. Ships in the strait were navigating blind, surrounded by pumice rafts thick enough to walk on, the air so filled with ash that breathing became difficult. Some sailors reported that the darkness was accompanied by an oppressive silence after the explosions ceased, broken only by the sound of ash falling like snow onto their decks. The atmospheric effects of Krakatoa extended far beyond the immediate region and lasted far longer than the event itself. The volcano injected massive quantities of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, creating aerosol clouds that circled the globe and reduced global temperatures by over 1 degree Celsius for the following year. The ash and sulfur particles created spectacular optical effects worldwide. For months afterward, people across Europe, North America, and Asia witnessed vivid red sunsets so intense that fire departments were called out, citizens believing the crimson skies indicated distant fires. The moon appeared blue or green on many nights. These atmospheric disturbances persisted for years, inspiring countless paintings, including possibly influencing the blood-red sky in Edvard Munch's The Scream. The eruption also provided science with valuable lessons, though they came at a horrific price. Krakatoa became the first major natural disaster to be documented with modern telecommunications. Telegraph cables allowed news of the catastrophe to spread around the world within hours, rather than weeks or months. Scientists could compare observations from different locations, tracking the atmospheric and oceanic effects in real time. The eruption helped validate theories about how volcanic activity could affect global climate, and proved that sound waves could travel through the atmosphere much farther than previously believed. In this sense, Krakatoa was a pivot point between the old world of isolated disasters and the modern era of globally connected catastrophes. Yet for all this scientific advancement, we remain fundamentally vulnerable to such events. Krakatoa, or more precisely, Anak Krakatoa, the child of Krakatoa that emerged from the caldera in 1927, remains active. It's been growing steadily, building itself back up from the ruins of its parent. In 2018, a portion of Anak Krakatoa collapsed into the sea, generating a tsunami that killed over 400 people along the Sunda Strait. The mountain is rebuilding itself, preparing perhaps for another performance of destruction. We watch it with modern instruments, monitor it with sophisticated technology, but we cannot stop it. We cannot even predict with certainty when it might erupt again. This is the uncomfortable truth that Krakatoa forces us to confront. Despite our technological progress, our sophisticated monitoring systems, our ability to communicate instantaneously across the globe, we remain at the mercy of geological forces we can observe but not control. We live on a thin crust floating atop an ocean of molten rock, and sometimes that reality asserts itself with devastating clarity. The Earth doesn't care about our cities, our civilizations, our aspirations. It operates on timescales and with energies that dwarf human concerns. The eruption of Krakatoa killed tens of thousands in a single day, altered global climate for years, and announced itself to the entire planet with a sound heard across a 13th of the Earth's surface. It remains a reminder that for all our self-importance, we are temporary guests on a dynamic, dangerous planet that was volcanic before we existed and will be volcanic long after we're gone. The mountain that exploded in 1883 is rebuilding itself right now, patient and indifferent, preparing perhaps to remind a future generation of the same lesson. Nature bats last, and when it swings for the fences.